So Regen is and the Commons Hub itself is obviously an audience that knows what we talk about when we talk about public good. Circles is a social money we are developing where we also aim to work towards the common good, and specifically a money that would help serve the common good. And then because Commons Hub is specifically a community, I want to talk today more about like full circle, like how do you create community currencies, what would governance look like, or how could it be impacted by a different type of money, and even briefly on pricing of such community currencies. I don't have a clicker, so space works. Great. My name is Benjamin Bollen. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been in the space for a while. This is somewhat a new topic to be talking about for me. I've mostly been on protocol parts, but I think we've moved forward as a space so that it's now really possible to start talking about sense-making, commons, collective sense-making. It's a topic I've been interested in for a long time and has been guiding. And I think we can finally start to work on that more concretely. And so just now, for today, for the first session, I will give a short presentation, but it will also just be interactive. So first of all, like interactive in the sense if you have questions, just feel free to interrupt and we can go deeper. We have plenty of time. And then afterwards, there was this like small game that I was already showing. To exit this. That I will invite you all to participate in. Which will involve, like, if you want, signing up for Circles, but as I'll explain, Circles is also just a social protocol for meeting people in real life, so we can do this in the room here. We will help you sign up for Circles, and then you can meet each other here, establish trust connections, and then join in this tree. But before we get there, I'll give a little bit of an intro here with the presentation. So yeah, I will give a little bit of a philosophical introduction of like why complementary currencies. It's not something that most people think about. Maybe here in this audience, it's more commonly understood. Then circles as a type of money that we call a social money. We're happy to improve the definition, but so far this is a nice definition that I like. And then talking a little bit about like ideas for how such a type of money could implement or impact governance and how it could specifically apply also for more advanced projects. And so why complementary currencies? Can everyone see the screen? Well, okay, great. Well, whether we like it or not, money is a very foundational information system for organizing society. It's sort of basic, but also basal in the sense that almost biologically we understand money, even though rationally it's very hard to understand, and it definitely structures the way we interact with each other. And then I'm not a historian, but like there's better books to read on this. I can give you a list afterwards. There's this dominant idea that for the past 300 years you should just have one money, like dollars or euros, and it's specifically a competitive currency. And the idea of even having complementary currencies isn't really widespread, even though even very recently and over the many years, like many communities do have and very successfully have complementary currencies. And I think with Circles this is definitely something that we want to promote. We want to push the idea for having not just fiat-based money, but having community currencies next to that. And then this is my philosophical take on this. So I thought of how do I structure this, different types of money. On the one axis, the vertical one, you would have this unit of account. Like what is the unit that we're using to base money off of? They can be exclusive resources, so hard to get to, only a few people have access to these resources, and so they're scarce. But it can also just be abundant, like very accessible or even equally accessible to all people. Maybe this is somewhat abstract, but I'll just already make it concrete, right? Like the obvious scarce resource that we base our money off of is energy, whether that's and the abundant resource that everyone equally has. I mean, the one that I care about in this talk is time. Like, everyone has equal access to time. It is scarce in the sense that you have it and you cannot have more of it than anyone else. But it is also not restricted to some people and not to others. And then on the other axis, like the horizontal axis, it's more the dynamics of the money. Like, what game does it create? Is it competitive or is it collaborative? And so in the sense of like public goods, we would say like rivalrous or non-rivalrous. So like, if I have it, does that exclude you from having it? Or can we both have it without needing to fight over that resource? And so if you just think about euros and dollars, fiat money, as we predominantly think as, if you say money, what is money? You think of a euro or you think of a dollar. Then on this dynamical horizontal axis, it creates a competitive game because we issue euros or dollars as a fiat, like out of thin air, but not out of thin air. You need to get a loan from a private bank and you need to pay this back with interest. But then if you think about it, that means that my ability to pay back my loan with interest means that's someone else's inability to not pay back their principal of the loan, because the interest is never generated. And so you need to go out into the world and compete with other people to find that interest to pay back to the bank. And so that means that, like, by definition, everyone cannot pay back their loan and have to default. And so it's almost like a negative sum game. I was thinking about this slide. We don't really use this word, but it's by construction a negative sum game. And then we soften this a little bit by saying, like, right, there's a future, and in the future we will have growth, and with growth we will have more resources, more capacity, but effectively we're just like bankrupting the environment. We're just extracting this negative sum from the environment to sort of cushion over the fact that we're actually competing with each other to pay back these private banks and then the central bank for money that was never created. And then on sort of, the resource axis, this is restricted by being energy based, as like the petrodollar, the US agreeing to, or like forcing OPEC countries to sell all oil in dollars. But it's also restricted because you need to go to a bank and ask for a loan to make new money. And then that bank, basically what they're judging for is your ability to outcompete other people in society. Because that's, as I just explained, the definition of being able to pay back your loan. Then we tried to do somewhat better. And so Bitcoin is still energy based. We all know this, like it's backed by proof of work. So it's slightly better on the accessibility. You don't need to go to a private bank, but you still need to have access to energy. And I would have put like early Bitcoin, like in almost a decade ago, more on the collaborative side. But now Bitcoin is basically fully issued. And if not fully issued, like the remaining Bitcoins you can still mine are already pre-allocated to the people that have the infrastructure to mine them. So it's basically a zero-sum game. Like, me having a Bitcoin is a Bitcoin that someone else doesn't have. And so it's less competitive, less rivalrous, but it also became less collaborative over time. Anyway, that's my short intro for like my mental model of types of money. And so I want to talk about circles as a type of a social money. And so circles is both an idea and a vision, somewhat optimistic one, but also an implementation and a project that's been carried forward by many teams. And so we're one of those teams that tries to carry this forward. It's a for-good project. There's no investors. It's meant to be owned by everyone and no one. But the core idea of circles is that it's rooted in a social graph and social fabric of people. So the social contract is that anyone can issue 1 circle per hour or 24 circles per day. But then they're just not spendable. Like there's no use if I issue my own money and you issue your own money, like I can't do anything with that. But then if we meet each other in person, then we can assert locally that we know that you're another human being, not an AI bot, and so your account is as valid as mine. And so what that means now is that my circles are fungible one-to-one to your circles, for example. And so if we build this social graph now, the circles become spendable over this social graph. So if I meet someone in person, I can assert that I trust them. And what it means is that they can change their circles one-to-one for mine. And then locally, transitively over the social graph, they can start spending their circles with anyone behind me, and vice versa. If they trust me as being a real person, then I can start spending my circles behind them over the social graph. And so we'll go a little bit more in detail about this, but that's sort of the implementation idea behind circles. And so the one thing you should remember is like every person gets one circle per hour unconditionally. So the unit of time, the unit of accounting is time. Like 1 hour is one circle. But as I sort of explained, it's not for free. You're actually doing something really valuable. Namely, you're identifying locally who are real people and which accounts are not. And so circles behave a little bit like water dynamically, if you think about it. If you don't trust anyone, you have your circles, but they can't move anywhere, so they're frozen like water into ice. They're unspendable. If you, on the other hand, like are very careless and on internet forums or on Telegram, are very easily convinced that someone's your friend and you should trust them, then it's very likely that eventually you'll trust an attacker and they can swap. And if you then trust them, they will swap their unspendable circles with your more spendable circles because you're trusted by other people. And so you lose out. So you're actually doing a meaningful job keeping your trust graph up to date. And so the analogy here is like if you're just careless trusting people, then it's like gas. You're like your circles will just, or the spendability of your circles will just evaporate. But if you just do this right, and right is very easy. It's like I've seen this person in real life. He's not yet a humanoid robot, and I have no intention, or I have no idea that he's really trying to trick me into malicious or trying to scam me. And so, as I said, like that forms this social graph, that forms a flow graph, where then people can start spending their circles beyond people that they know, because that's the whole point. It wouldn't be very helpful if I can just spend it with the people that I know. The point is to be able to spend it further away, the way you do with euros or dollars. And as I said, like time is the unit of account, so 1 hour is one circle. But if we would just indefinitely mint circles, then that wouldn't be a useful unit of account either. There could just become too many circles. And so in exchange to balance this out, circles are discounted at 7% per year. So what that means is like a new circle is always 1 hour, but your old circles will, in balance on your wallet, decrease at 7% per year. And so in effect, you could get this curve where if you wouldn't spend, you don't just get a linear increase, but it starts flattening out because these two terms add up or cancel each other out. Rather, you have a linear term of one circle, 1 hour, if you don't have any. But as you have more circles, whether you've minted them or you've earned them, you start paying more of the 7%, and they balance out at roughly 125,000 circles. And of course, if you plot this, so say that you're a human and you would start at year 0 minting, and you never ever spend any circles, so you collect all of them, then roughly, quite quickly you get to a very decent amount. So the less you have, the quicker you accumulate circles. But as you have more, it slows down, and you never really reach this, but roughly around 80 years, which is sort of the idea of the 7%, that it's like a human lifespan well lived, you would basically max out. It would be negligible what you get. But if you stop minting, they also just disappear because you don't have this new addition term of fresh circles being minted into your balance. And so if you turn this graph around, what it looks like is you actually have a taxation system, but you have a negative tax for humans. So if you don't have any circles, then you get more circles because you only have the minting term. And so the less you have, the more you get. But then as you reach this balance point, you just basically aren't taxed and you would get back to that. However, if you're very economically active and you earn more circles than that, which you can definitely do, so you cannot mint more than 125,000 circles, but you can definitely hold more than that. Then you get this ever so slightly non-zero tax. However, if you're like a company or an AI bot or some organization or a community itself, then you have this flat tax of 7% because you don't get to mint your own personal circles, right? If you have questions, by the way, you should like pause, ask, or raise your hand. But by itself, so that's not enough. Like it's sort of foundational layer, but we want to have more because people organize in groups, organize in communities. You don't live in a global village, and so you want to add structure to this social graph of circles. And the way we try to do that is we create these groups. And so groups are, anyone can create groups, whether they're managed by some multi-sig or they're just programmatic accounts, like smart contract rules, without any governance. The idea of a group is that if you qualify on whatever the condition is for you to move your circles into it, you can mint those group circles one for one by collateralizing your personal circles into those group currencies. So imagine that the Commons Hub here would start Commons Hub token. Then, for example, if you contribute your time or you contributed money or you're just even attending here, those could all be different conditions that specify how many of your own circles you can convert effectively into Commons Hub circles. And so you would have a social money that is now specific to people that have interacted here, but it's also scarce. You don't start by having an infinite amount of circles. So even if you're interacting in multiple communities, you have to choose which circles, how much of your balance you're actually converting into that community if you have contributed or participated. And so what you get is a proof of participation, like the idea that whatever the definition of participation is your ability to own that community token or community currency. I'm just some ideas of like in a more abstract of what this could be. So a lot of people already collect POAPs. So POAPs is obviously a very nice way to say like that's one community of people, whether it's just any of them or several. You can make this a trusted list. So if there's a membership that's already known, and you could extend it to friends of friends because you have this social graph. Or like I said, if you're helping out, for example, here at the event, if you're volunteering here, that could earn you the ability to like mint your circles into Commons Hub circles. And so the idea is to collateralize, and then you can make groups of groups, etc. But yeah, maybe later. Anyway, this gives me sort of by construction a first draft of this definition of a social money. And so the idea is that circles is a social money. And what I think that some properties are that a social money should have is, one, I mean, it's social, so it should be rooted in people. And so rooting it in this social graph and having this soft Sybil resistance property. So by rather than having some global registry proof of humanity like that says these accounts are humans and these are not because they're not on our whitelist, there is no global registry. There is just people locally asserting that they know these accounts are real or they believe these accounts are real. And so hence soft Sybil resistance as a minimum. A more philosophical point is like fair issuance. So fair issuance over people is somewhat obvious from the construction, like everyone gets one circle per hour, but also fair issuance over time. We have this sort of weird idea in crypto for the past decade that we've been around plus, like issuance should be a birthing event. Like almost all of ETH is issued, almost all of Bitcoin is issued, tokens get issued at the creation of the project. And it's like, so for me as a protocol builder over a decade, this has been a super weird experience. Getting a bit personal now, but like, but the idea is, if we want to build a web, like a Web3, we should be building things like HTTP, TCP, and it doesn't make any and yes, we need to try to monetize this, because that's one of the problems that the existing internet doesn't have inherently. And so, but how do we balance this better? If the next generation is like screwed because all the previous generation had all the money, I think our generation can probably relate with this. Not gonna go in depth of this, but like we would want protocols that treat like our children equally to ourselves. Like it's super weird to have a money that says we're just now at this random time in the 2010s, 2020s going to issue all the money, and then everyone else has to fight over inheritance or whatever. Like the anyway, I'm going too deep into this. I'll shut it down. But I think this issuance over time is just something that we have really not discussed enough in this space. And then this, again, yeah, I made up this word some time ago. It's not an existing word, but it best describes sort of this property that I think a money should have, which is intercohesive. And it breaks down into these two parts, like cohesive for a community, like a money. As I said, I started out with like, in some ways, whether we like it or not, it's an information carrying mechanism that guides our social interactions. Like it's hard to deny this, whichever side you're on. And so we would want to have money that binds communities together, but we also want to have the property that it binds between communities together and doesn't separate them. And so the benefit of circles and building communities on top of it is that everything is using the same unit of account. Like 1 hour is one circle. And so you can very easily move between communities as well. And you have hopefully this cohesive force between communities as well. And so I call this intercohesive, but it's not a dictionary word. And so coming back to like opening graph, I mean, of course, everyone puts their own thing in the top right corner of such graphs. So I'm equally guilty. But circles as a resource for the unit of account is time. We don't often think, I mean, we say this in like expressions all the time, of course, but it is a really interesting resource to use as a unit of account. It's the same for everyone. It's not corruptible. It's accessible to everyone in equal amounts. And we have devices that measure it very accurately without any new cryptography needed. Like clocks are some of the oldest mechanisms we have. And then the social contract, as I sort of try to explain, is by construction collaborative. Like if it's not collaborative, it just doesn't work. If the social contract of my circles are equal to yours, if we're both human, is not sticking, then fine. Like this idea will be tried and die. So by its start, it is collaborative, but it also can be collaborative, as I said, because the resource it's based on is not rivalrous. My hour of time is not excluding you from having an hour of time. And so there's no forcing function that forces us to fight for our survival, which we have sort of with the fiat money. Like my success, however which way I want to turn it, requires to be better than someone else, because otherwise I die. It's like a you or me kind of construction. Anyway, maybe enough. Well, this is the. If you have any questions, you should ask. So this was a little bit of the introduction of circles. I will briefly talk about some ideas of like how this could affect governance. And if there are people who are going to the hackathon, feel free to feel inspired this weekend. But I mean, do anything you want with it, of course. A few years ago, Vitalik wrote this rather interesting post, I think, where I came back to it. I think the title is Moving Beyond Coin Voting. And so now, obviously, my spin on it is, what would it look like to use this type of social money? So circles being an example of a social money, but what would it look like if you would have such a social money to move beyond coin voting? And I'm just gonna hope that this audience is like mildly up to date with these terms. I'll try to explain them a little bit, but again, I'm probably not the best person for you to learn this from. So there's a reference below if you want to learn more, the original post. And in this post, Vitalik lists some mechanisms that he thinks can help improve the way we do coin voting right now. And why does coin voting need to be improved? Right now, we definitely use it as decision making for DAOs and for communities. As I said at the beginning, my interest is really sense making. And I think a lot of people here also, but a lot of people do think about this more. But it's important to emphasize this. There's no point in trying to make decisions collectively if you've not first tried to make sense of the problems collectively. Because if you're not seeing the same problems, then you're not seeing the same solutions, and then you're just going to disagree or fight over which problems should be solved first. And I think a lot of DAOs right now just externalize the cost of a collective sense making to forums and to people's time and to assuming that we figure out the problems before we vote on them. And obviously people work on this, but it's really difficult. But then the big problem that we still have, this post is a few years old, but I don't think the problem has disappeared. Vitalik outlines that most of this governance is just still the original founders or a small group of people that hold most of the coins and tightly coordinate. And so while we think that we have somewhat decentralized governance, really we just have like a club of few whales that control the vote. And so all the mechanisms we have for voting might have weaknesses that aren't exploitable because there's just this tight club of whale holders that tightly coordinate, and it's not really yet scaling to large communities. And that's ultimately what we should be here for, at least again in my opinion. Like if we want to try to build systems and monies that help us coordinate society better, then that needs to scale beyond like 5 founders that hold all the money, because it's just an oligarchy. We've tried this for centuries. It works, but it's not really innovative. Anyway, all the intro for like recapping this article. And so some of the mechanisms that he describes that could improve coin voting we're trying to adopt, of course. But the lens here would be like, what does a social money add to this if you'd want to do governance through coin voting, but with a social money? And so the first very known idea is sort of this idea of quadratic voting, quadratic funding. The idea is that like a vote of a whale should not equally outweigh that of a smaller holder. It's not because you have just way less money that your opinion should count equally less. And so the idea is that your voting power is reduced by the amount of money you put up. So you need to put up increasingly more money to have more voting power. But this doesn't work if you don't have this property of soft Sybil resistance in your money, because then if I'm just a whale with a lot of coins, I can just split it out over many accounts, pretend that I'm 1,000 poor people, and the whole mechanism doesn't add anything. So you need this idea of soft Sybil resistance. I mean, there's Gitcoin passports, etc. But the social money would have this be built into the money itself. And then also additionally, there's this dynamic access, like with voting. I mean, a lot of us had elections just now. The idea is like you have one vote per 4 years roughly, or 5 years per person. And then on the other axis is like, if you have $1 million worth of this project token, you can probably decide a lot. If you have a money that is more fairly distributed, starting from circles like 1 circle per hour, and then if you participate in communities, you get to select to mint some of it. Then you have also just a more fair distribution, and so there isn't big outliers in this money distribution, or it should at least be reduced. Then a second idea is this idea of retroactive funding. It's way easier to decide whether a project is good and well executed and had good results in the future looking back. That's just the way of the universe, I guess. And the idea of retroactive funding is that projects can start with their project tokens. Either you earn them through participation, or if you're enthusiastic about a project, you can already start buying them. But then larger funds with their own governance, of course, retrospectively look and say, oh, these were actually really valuable contributions, so we're now going to reward this by buying up that token in hindsight. And so again, like community currencies here are really helpful. Like it's sort of a white label solution to bootstrap your own project token for whatever you're doing. And then retroactive funding pools could look back to like reward those that did the good work. A third point, and I'll try to go a bit faster maybe, is just acknowledging that these mechanisms are just mechanisms and we don't always know that they work very well, and it's good to have human judgment in the loop. So maybe you just want the mechanism to like poll the wider community of what is a good idea and not hard code it to be tied into the execution of the decisions. And so you can do this by using this voting mechanism as a loosely coupled advisory, Vitalik calls it. And again, if you have circles as a complementary money to the money your DAO or your community already has as its sort of harder currency, you have a complementary currency that you can use as loose coupling as a way to get opinions from the wider community of contributors. And then use that as legitimacy also for like making the hard decisions with a smaller core of people in the project. And then lastly, because even that, we should be humble enough, like the ultimate rule is forking. People should be able to vote with their feet and just move to somewhere else or take what they have along. And because it's all based on the same unit of account, they're very easily they're highly liquid, and then you can also just implement groups to be forkable. Anyway, those were my thoughts on like social money to improve governance. And I think here for Commons Hub, like it's explicitly a project to try to govern this space that we're in today collectively as a commons through a meritocracy. I can't pronounce words. Meritocracy something. Anyway, so ideas for the taking. Then it's all nice to have money, but we want it to be exchangeable and worthwhile. And so if you just spin up a lot of groups, currencies, maybe they're not necessarily fundable. So the idea is two sides. One, it's really nice to own your whole financial stack. How am I doing on time? Ooh, wow, okay. Need to be faster. I thought I was going to already have finished. Let me speed up a little bit. So Circles is both the vision, but also just the implementation. The implementation of it is smart contracts on Gnosis chain. And Gnosis chain tries to be, well, it's the whole afternoon event, but Gnosis chain tries to be a chain that is accessible for people and run by people. And so the idea is that it's easy to run validators for Gnosis chain. And like I said, Gnosis chain then runs Circles. And so you can own the whole stack of your community currency all the way to like the TCP/IP packets. But it's also important, like if you run the Gnosis chain, you earn GNO. And if you have Circles and you build your community currency on it, then you get issued those community currencies, or at the lower level, Circles. And so if you think about how do we build or fund the price mechanism, you have both sides of a liquidity pool. If you run your own stack, you have, of course, some capital costs to stake. It's proof of stake, so into your validators. But then validators are just people, and hope. The most costly part, arguably, about running your node is not the GNO, is not the bandwidth and the electricity even. It's the expertise and people's attention to keep it up and running. And so there are projects and protocols that also Gnosis Chain is trying to integrate as early as possible for distributed staking. So having a node up 99.9% of the time is really, really difficult. Having a node up 87% or 80% of the time is a lot easier. And so if we can get to these protocols of distributed staking, it should just become more easy and less stressful to run your own nodes. And even then, as that requires still attention from people, that can be one of the rules with which you earn your community currency. That's a contribution you do, and so it adds to how much community currency you get. But basically, you get both sides of a liquidity pool. Maybe you get some fees to offset your electricity costs, but you have a almost out-of-the-box free price mechanism or price finding mechanism for your community currency, which is just also important to think about. Like, the point is not for circles to only be one circle is one circle. It would be nice to find price points for it in dollars, even though I clearly put them in the lower left corner. Anyway, I'll make this a bit faster because we should make this interactive. Just coming back sort of to the beginning of the talk, if money is this sort of lowest information substrate that we have to organize ourselves, then we clearly also have more refined or higher up the stack information ecosystems. I mean, the internet, social media, these types of things with which we sort of form opinions and interact with each other beyond just pure money and trade and commerce. And so if we take those points from like the previous slide, this is now just like far out there. This is just throwing ideas into the ether, literally. Like, can we not actually use then these mechanisms to cultivate better ecosystems? So the previous slide was like information ecosystems as a common good. I think we should think more often of like the information we output and consume in our community or personally as a common good. And how do we manage this much better? And so you could think about using quadratic voting with your community currency to allocate how important or how much exposure specific messages should get to your community. And it puts skin in the game. Like, retweeting now costs you some of your community currency. It's nice if you get this community currency already out of the box for free and it's not $1 and it's equally distributed. It's just one unit per time, like circles. So that makes it easier to use this money for putting skin in the game. But then this can help your forward propagation of like which information should really spread through my community. If people do that, though, you also have a free extra benefit. You have the reverse trajectory, because if people created votes, then you have a trace of where the information came from, and you can start computing likelihoods that this was even grounded in reality, or does it come from some bot farm from my vantage point. Right now, and increasingly, it's hard to know if something is not generated, and if you have information propagation rooted and traceable in a social graph, then I can also, from my vantage point, see like, was this likely a thing that actually happened in reality, or is it just indiscernibly generated by some AI? Anyway, I promise to go faster. I'm not doing a good job. Citizen journalism is just a really nice thing. If people can get retroactively funded for good journalism they do, it can maybe help this sort of guerrilla journalism. And so again, Vitalik writes really good posts. So the inspiration here is last year he wrote thoughts on community notes. I'll try to keep it brief. Like community notes, if you don't know, on X, Twitter, are these like posts that people can add to tweets to say like this was maybe misinformation or unfounded or it was helpful or not. And in this post, he describes that right now this uses some matrix factorization algorithm, like some somewhat obscure linear algebra, and instead he proposes that we should use these mechanisms as we described them, like quadratic voting, etc., to have more transparent economic mechanisms to filter community notes, like is this helpful or not. The problem that he outlines but doesn't solve or doesn't have a solution for is if you have one platform that globally needs to decide whether something was helpful or not, it's really hard. Like you then need to just decide whether you are hypersensitive and highlight everything, or it's better to let some things fly and only highlight the really damaging notes or unhelpful notes. But if you have a subjective money, what Circles inherently is, if different communities can have their own community currencies, then you can start having subjective classes. You can say, from within this community, we value these principles. And from another community, we think this is harmful. And you can do that filtering with specific community currencies. You can be part of multiple ones, or you don't even have to be part of them, but because they're based on the same consistent unit of account, you can just merge them also. You can say like, what if I would like look at a global perspective and apply the filtering of everyone's vote to get a global vote? Like, what does it look like? But maybe I can select some viewpoints. And I think that's a very important point to get to like collective sense making. Is like, how do you actually look through the eyes of someone else? I think it's a thing we should try to do more often. Anyway, and then the last point, all of this is very nice, but again, we know kind of that if people don't have an incentive to benefit from it, it's likely going to have a small uptake. So you could turn these votes into prediction markets and say like, in a general sense, like, will this post have been considered helpful for the community? And if that turns out to be true, then you benefit over the ones that got this wrong. And so then you have an incentive to actually put your money at stake and not just for the inherent good of getting a better information ecosystem, which, by the way, is a very important inherent good. But yeah, people will be people and greed will be greed. So anyway, this is the part where it really becomes interactive. So we haven't solved anything really yet, but you're very welcome to try and join or go a different direction with whatever ideas. We have two wallets right now. The legacy Circles Garden wallet, but also Gnosis is building a new wallet that integrates all the aspects of Gnosis and very kindly also Circles. So we want to try to encourage you to scan with your phone right now this QR code, because I will need you to have that app later. So this is just a browser wallet that runs in hopefully most browsers. So if you don't already have it, try to get this QR code, or app.metri.xyz is just the URL you can type. This is a beta release, so let us know if there's things that are confusing or don't work. And so if you do get that, then, well, there's a few onboarding steps, so just to get this all cleared out. So it uses passkeys. They get stored in whatever password manager your operating system is configured for, so Apple Keychain or Google iCloud or 1Password or Bitwarden, or hopefully with a few clicks you initiate that process. It's somewhat of a compromise, but it's actually decent UX. So don't put like your $100 million worth of tokens on this wallet, because it's stored in iCloud or whatnot. It's not great, but it is reasonably self-custodial and very convenient. And for small amounts, for day-to-day amounts, I think it's way fine. Anyway, just to give you an idea of like where the UX is, you have this like top left corner which is sort of your wallet. And if you click it, you get a QR code that is your address on Gnosis chain. So you get a safe contract on Gnosis chain. This QR code gives you that address. And then on the right side, you have this little, what is an address book icon, and it will give you all the addresses you've stored, so you can like save a name to an address so that you remember which address this was, unless you have very good memory. That's helpful. But there's specifically this new button there. And so Sean isn't here, unfortunately, but like we both know each other, and that's the sufficient bar, as I was explaining, to say that I trust this person is a real person, not a humanoid robot, and not trying to cheat me. And so then you should feel comfortable to click that trust button. And what that says is that my circles are now fungible for his circles or her circles or their circles, sorry. And they can spend across me to the people behind me. And if they do the same, and this UI should really change to be like a bidirectional by default thing, then I can spend over them to the people behind them. And so that button is very important, and you want to get to like, you both trust each other, this green thingy there. And if you do that, then you can start participating in sort of like this game that we have here, where if you donate, then you get this NFT, but you also get visualized how you sort of interacted in the network towards this donation address. And so this QR code gives a website, so you can scan this not with the wallet, but like with your actual camera, so you get the website to have the instructions, but then there's a button mint with Metri. And so now well, first again, if there's questions, I'm very open to answering any of them. Yeah.
We have like 4 minutes for questions, so maybe 2
really?
questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What about wallets for businesses? Would they be considered real persons and operate in the same way?
Right.
And they might have different kind of requirements for how much money you have to mint. So I think you talked about group community things for their internal currencies, but how would it work for commercial settings?
Right, so we have 3 types actually of like nodes on this graph. There can be people, and so they have the right to mint, and they should be trusted if they're real people, so that their circles are spendable. We have groups that can collateralize or group other circles, but you also have organizations. And so organizations can trust, so they can say like, I'm willing to accept these circles because I know they're real, or these group currencies because I trust that community, but they don't mint anything. So they can be part of the network, but not, the social contract is that organizations, companies aren't people, and they shouldn't get the same rights as humanoid, flesh-made people. So hopefully that.
Given that they produce most of the services and products on the market, if they reject CRC, then we would have to compulsorily go back to the old, system of money to buy things and stuff. So
Right.
it has to be made easy for the existing system as well for
Right.
the transition. Otherwise, your entire vision collapses.
Right. So I think this ties back to the idea that they're complementary currencies. And so there's quite an interesting history of complementary currencies, both at nation level, but also many within countries. You can, or the way that we would approach this is by doing a partial payment, like a small percentage in circles and dollars in the real world. So if you would go out to buy something, then maybe 2 or 4% you would pay with circles, and the remaining you would pay with normal dollar values. But on the abstract point, I think, like, for example, Switzerland is a very nice example. They still have this internal currency that's literally called US. And when the external currency does weakly in the international markets, they can still just internally cooperate. And it's been very beneficial for Switzerland as an economy to be able to buffer the international fluctuations of their external currency. But yeah, we should talk afterwards.
So one purpose that I can foresee, and I need your confirmation for that, is that it would be a way for a community to issue a currency, because they would then decide, they would have a pool of value, social value, that they could then issue collectively into existence, or they could mint it into a real economic value for goods and services. Would that work then?
Right, yeah. So the idea is definitely that you can exchange goods and services internally as a means of exchange. So it's not just a unit of account, it's obviously should also function as a means of exchange, and then even equally as a store of value. Like, it doesn't actually inflate.
So it would just be a currency that is communitively put in existence.
Right. Yeah. And so there's two layers of community. There's sort of the global layer of like, we are all a human being, and we should just have access to at least some basic money. And then you can form more structure on top of that and say like, no, but we are also participating here in Commons Hub, and that means something to us. So you have those two layers, yes.
We need to wrap up for the upcoming talk.
Thank you. I will. So we will keep on this screen on the side this live tree. So this is a screenshot from this morning. But if you first get the wallet, and if you have any questions, ask. And then if you meet some of us, and please do, then we can establish that connection. And you can also establish among yourselves the whole afternoon that connection, so that you grow this social graph. Here is a perfect occasion to do that. And then once you are somewhat connected in the graph, you can try to mint towards this donation address, and then your branch and name will show up on the board, and so you can play the game. Very much thanks. So we're
Thank
at
you so much.
90, and so let's get this. Okay.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.